Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here. In this very special video, we have our guest with us, Vincent. We're currently sitting at CCP Games in London, and we want to have an interesting chat with Vincent here about really just taking us through life as a game artist. Vincent is working as a senior character artist here at CCP Games, so we're just gonna leave it up to you. Give a little presentation, introduction to yourself, the company.
Hey everyone, so my name is Vincent and I'm a character artist at CCP Games, and I've recently started working here, but in the past I've worked mainly in games but also in VFX and collectibles and a bit in animated films. And so yeah, CCP, which has been nice enough to allow us to record this podcast in their studio,
Very nice.
which, you know, is not often the case because the games industry is like the CIA very often. But so they allowed us to do that. So I'm going to give a short intro about who they are and what they do. So CCP is mainly well known for EVE Online, which is a big MMO that's been running for 15 years now. It's older than WoW, just to say. And yeah, they've also done quite a few VR games, such as Eve Valkyrie and Gunjack and whatnot. And yeah, here in London, we're making a new game. The only public thing is that it's an MMO, so stay tuned.
We are excited.
Yeah, so am I. It's a really cool project, and that's all I'll say.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, so in this chat here, we want to talk more about the game industry. Morten and I have obviously been talking a lot about VFX, and there are definitely some parallels between VFX and gaming, which we'll probably get into. But we just want to hear about from the inside, from a senior character artist in games, just taking us through generally your day as a game artist. Like, what happens? What happens when you go to work, and then
how make game?
How make game? Make game how? Please tell.
Well, I think the really important thing is what you said. We're making a game, and that's everybody's goal. Whether you're a character artist, an engineer, a designer, or you're working on sound, you're not just working on that one thing. You're working on a game. So that's the end goal that everyone has to keep in mind. So how does a day start? Usually you get into work and you have a thing called stand-up, which is basically a small meeting where everybody stays standing up because the goal of this meeting is to keep it really fast. And everyone updates the rest of the crowd on what he's been doing the day before and what he intends to achieve that day. Right? So it's fairly simple and it gives you an overview of what everybody's doing. And this will depend on the size of the company. Like in smaller companies, well, you'll have a stand-up, well, you're going to have a lot of different disciplines that are mixed. In really big companies, there's going to be just a character artist stand-up or gameplay engineer stand-up or whatnot. And when that is done, you just start your day, right? So you said what you said you were going to do and not something else. You don't go to watch YouTube videos. You actually, do the thing. And very often, I'd say it's really important that everybody starts by being synced up, because it's usually a great moment to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And if everyone is blocked by anything, because we're making a game, again, it's very collaborative, right? It's like characters don't exist in a vacuum.
No.
They have to be concepted, they have to be animated, they have to be implemented, they have to answer a lot of constraints, whether it's narrative, gameplay, anything you can imagine. So we make sure that everybody's okay with what everybody's doing, and then we just get to it. And usually there's not much more than that. Like once that meeting is done, you get to work, and eventually you'll have other meetings to discuss a bunch of different things because you may be at a specific state of the game where you need to talk about certain things. Like a game that is in pre-production will have a lot of meetings about, hey, what game are we making? Because it's not that obvious, right? Every time, I mean, you may be working on the 12th iteration on a new game, or you may be working on something super innovative. There's always something to talk about that you don't know what you're going to do before in production. And once you're in production, well, you can have a lot of meetings about solving stuff that was not well discussed in pre-production or new problems that arise. So first meeting, then lots of work and meetings in between. And once in a while, you will have like reviews or show and tells where basically the entire team or clusters of the team are united together to look at what the game looks like. Because that's what the most important for everybody is to know the state of the game, I would say. And well, that's more a personal opinion, but for me, that's also what's super exciting. Oh, such and such put the new animation, and now this new skill that we had in the game feels super powerful. This is great. Let's keep that feeling and maybe make sure all the other characters are up to date with that. Or suddenly, hey, now it doesn't crash when you boot it. That's fantastic. So personally, like I don't see myself so much as an artist, but as a game developer, and I think it's really important because that's our common goal, and it's just super exciting to see the whole software build itself up.
I like the thought of like it's not just you have your one job to do, but you're all collaborating on one thing, and you all want to make that one thing as good as possible. You're not just only worried about being in your little bubble and just making that little thing perfect.
Yeah, I mean, there's many reasons for that, but I would say like on a very subjective level, if I just want to make cool characters, I can do that at home. And if I want to get paid for it, I can do that at home freelance. But if you want to make games, the chances are the most obvious way to do it is to work in a collaborative environment, which is going to be a development studios, right? So I would say that's really important. And with that comes a lot of new things that are required, which are just not you make character good, right? It's also making sure you communicate well and your character not only is good, but it also answers a lot of constraints that are important for other job departments, right? So
I really like what you're talking about here, but like you see yourself more as a game developer, because this is something I saw there was a huge controversy about this on Twitter like some weeks ago now, where they were talking about how there were some people who were saying that, oh, you're only a game developer if you're a technical programmer, and people were raging about this because they're like, everyone's goal is to do the same thing. If you're a community manager or if you're a chef at the game studio or a character artist or programmer and whatnot, you're developing a game here. So I like how you're putting it here, that your primary purpose is to develop a game and not necessarily to make one cool character.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, it's true that it's a big machine, right? And a guy who's a community manager or a guy who's, say, like a game master on an online game or whatever, for me, or a QA, whatever you can think of, they're just as much part of the team as anyone. They might not always be in the studio because sometimes those things are in other studios or outsourced or whatever. But without them, the game fails, right? It's like, imagine you have like a fantastic movie, but there's no trailer and there's no posters anywhere. No one's ever going to know about it, right? And that's a trap a lot of indie games developers fall into, right? We've seen quite a few really cool games, but they had only taken care about making the game fantastic and no one knew. And it's really sad when you see like a great project failing like that. Whereas, well, sometimes you see poor products, let's say, with a huge marketing machine and they make a lot of money and you're really sad.
I mean, it's like the more eyes you can get on your product, the better it's probably going to sell to begin with. It might be shitty, but you know.
Well, at least there'll be awareness.
Exactly.
For it, right?
I remember when there was a film that came out years ago, John Carter of Mars. And like I didn't know about John Carter until we had a teacher at the school we attended who worked on it just like a couple of months before he was like, oh, that's a film that's out, I guess. But like no marketing was done for it. That was an interesting, when you have terrible, well, I guess that was also pretty terrible, but even more terrible films where they do a lot more marketing and a lot more people get to see it.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. I mean, we just touched on the communication aspect, but in general, it's true that sometimes when people talk, they're like, hey, the devs have, and they're talking about the programmers. And it's always a little weird because indeed we're all developers, right? It's like you wouldn't say that a game designer is not actually developing the game, right? No. So I think it's important to encapsulate everyone under that term because the collaboration of everyone is absolutely necessary. And especially in smaller studios where, well, guess what? You don't have 20 game designers, you have one or two. And it's the same thing with character artists or whatnot. You can imagine everybody's crucial. And if one link in the chain just falters, then guess what? Your whole game falls apart. It's a house of cards, basically. And but that's part of what I really like about the job, to be honest. The fact that we all feel like we have to rely on each other to get to this final goal, which is release a game, and hopefully, people can enjoy it, and depending on the quality of it, maybe it can even, have a big impact on some people. I mean, just as any cultural product can have, I'm pretty sure that you guys have been really touched or moved by a movie or a book or whatnot.
Literally changed my life. I mean, I went into movies because movies were awesome, and that changed because of my career.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel that games, while some games already do that, I feel like the medium is still a bit immature in the sense that we've been making games for 40 years, right? And human race have been doing movies for almost 3 times that, if my math is roughly correct.
Yes-ish.
Which means that movies have had a lot more time to mature,
for example,
and books way more. So I think you have a few games like that already have the power to really touch an audience and go beyond simple entertainment.
Yeah.
And again, nothing wrong with simple entertainment. Sometimes you just want to blow shit up. It's cool.
Yeah.
But I feel that because the medium is interactive, sometimes you can go a lot deeper than that. And it's really cool. And I think that people who've played games like, I don't know, on top of my head, I will say like Journey, Inside, or that Dragon Cancer. Well, you don't come out of it thinking, meh, it was just a game.
Yeah.
And, my hope is that we can do some of that here, but also that along my career I can touch a few games like this, because it's, in the end, everybody has different goals, but that would be my goal, because like some people have done that, have done games which have had that effect on me, and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, everybody has this vocation, right? Some people will change the world by actually being involved in humanitarian stuff. Like, for me, hopefully it's creating a product that will touch people. And I think that it's just super powerful. So hopefully, games continue for a really long time and mature, and we get to see some really cool new experiences.
Yeah, I think definitely, because like the games and entertainment industry is the biggest industry out there. Like it's other industries like the war industry, the military industry and stuff. But like in terms of pure entertainment, games I think is by far the biggest.
I think it's a lot bigger than films.
Yeah. Most people don't know that actually, and it's quite surprising. I mean, I was surprised myself when I heard about it.
Just there's so many people that play video games.
Yeah,
like so many people play. Obviously, a lot of people watch films as well, but there's just a lot of video games out there, and it's a super powerful medium.
Yeah, it's like you watch a movie once in the cinema, and then you're kind of done. But you don't play a game once; you keep going back to it.
Yeah.
Like, I play one game because I'm lame, and I play Stardew Valley, and I played like Stardew Valley for like 200 hours. My farm is perfect, guys. But like, that, and they have kind of microtransactions. Not a good thing necessarily, but it means they just generate money.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, if that allows them to, create more content and stuff, then that's awesome.
No, you don't have microtransactions in movies.
No.
Yet. Don't give them ideas.
You want to see the next scene? Just pay $2 extra.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to see it with gore? Here's like 50 cents extra.
Some marketing person out there is listening.
Yeah. Oh god,
we want royalties.
That's actually a terrible but amazing idea at the same time.
So we might pivot FlippedNormals now
to an evil marketing company.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting games, like, because it's just going to keep on growing. Like, one of the things with games is you do just require technology for that. Like, if you're in 1950s, you can't really do anything. You can't do a video game because you don't have a computer.
Yeah.
But now everyone has a computer in their pocket, and they're getting powerful. And
like we just saw today, we just saw a video trailer for the new NVIDIA 20. What is it?
Or the RTX card?
Yeah, the RTX card.
The 1,200 euro price of a full computer card.
It's crazy.
That's
but like we were talking about gigaflops and whatever. I don't know what a gigaflop is, but it's like the performance on those cards, if you're just trying to push real time, is obscene. Obviously, games range from Stardew Valley to
best game ever,
Journey, and I don't know, like Uncharted or something. Like if that's the scale of games in terms of visual complexity, right? But having more and more powerful machines like that just means that we can push it further, and I think that's really awesome.
Well, it's really interesting because, like, in terms of what we can do in real time, games are slowly catching up to movies.
Yeah.
And of course, like if you take a frame from whatever big movie out there and a frame even from Uncharted 4, there's still a big difference, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at what that difference is today compared to what it was 10 years ago, a massive leap has been made. Yeah. And the more we advance, the faster it seems that technology is catching up.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm curious because I see like real-time engines such as Unreal are starting to be used in the movie industry for Previs, for example.
Yeah, they are definitely used a lot in Previs.
Yeah.
Right? And if you've seen like the last demos from Epic Games at GDC, I think the hair on the characters they showcased were actual real hair. They weren't hair cards. And this kind of stuff, well, we're seeing a blending of the two mediums in terms of technology. Of course, it's very, very new, and it's only for super high-end stuff, right? If you're working in indie movies, don't get access to Unreal Previs. But and most games can't afford to have real hair systems yet. But it's definitely going to happen, and I wonder what it's going to mean both for the content that we create, like the products, but also for the people that are involved in making them.
Yeah.
So exciting time.
That was something I remember when we were working in films. Is like I always wished we had access to more real-time stuff. Like when we're doing, like you preview something in Maya, I was like, okay, I need to preview my displacement map. I have to render it. Yeah. Like I actually have to render it, even though it's totally possible to do real time. If I throw it into Marmoset or something, like, okay, yeah, there you go. Now I can see it.
The tools we had in film, they sucked. Yeah. they were powerful, but it was like these like giant digging machines which can just like excavate like a huge mountain in one go. They can never be stopped. They can take on anything. But they aren't fun and dynamic. Like it's not like driving a car where you're just like cruising around. It's a mountain killer machine. Yeah. And that's also because, in films, you don't care about real time. You don't care about how fast it is. Or you just care, does it look as good as it can be? Well, in games, you gotta just pump out so many more assets. You gotta just be more dynamic here. Yeah. So the tools which you've had, like Substance Painter and Marmoset and Unreal and all these, they were so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a game where you have to do 60 frames per second, or in games where you do one frame every 24 hours, there's a big difference. In movies,
I mean, it's interesting because it's a difference, not only in the philosophy of doing the art, but also in just the pipeline and the tools we're gonna use, right? And also the people that are involved, right? I mean, in movies, like jobs are gonna be much more segmented. Like very often, you're gonna have a modeler and then a texture artist and then a shading artist, but maybe there's a look dev person in the middle or whatever, and then there's a renderer. Whereas in games, well, this is almost all compressed into one position.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the whole specialization versus generalization, because in film you have to be more specialized. Yeah. And this is one of these things that we get questions about all the time. How early should you specialize and what should you do? And honestly, it depends on the size of the company. And if you're looking at big studios like DNAG, MPC, Framestore, and ILM and all those in film, they have thousands of employees. Like you literally won't believe how big they are. Yeah. Like in the DNAG building has 1,000 people in it at any one time. It's
London.
London, just in London. It's ridiculous. And you're like, how? Yeah. How does it physically fit here?
You only see that when we have fire drills. Yeah. And the entire street is just filled. And you're like, this is 1,000 people.
Yeah. And it's crazy. But like if you're in that big company, you have to specialize more. Because the more people you have, the more segmented you're going to be. Yeah. And the less people you have, the more general you're going to have to be. So this is the same for like if you're in VFX or games or whatever it is. It's the bigger the studio, or the bigger the projects rather, because you can have 1,000 people, but you can have like also 100 projects. But if you have really big projects, you just have to be more specialized for that. Which is something we talked about just before we're recording now, like how general you are in games.
Yeah, I mean it's a big topic, but it's true that in games, say if you're a character artist, it's most commonly your job is going to be, it starts when you receive a concept art. Usually, if the game requires that, you're also receiving a narrative brief, which tells you not only, well, you get the concept art to tell you what the character looks like, right? But personally, I feel it's as important to get a narrative brief so I know who that character is. because when I'm making the character, I tend to keep that in mind,
Yeah.
right? What's his character or her character? Because I think that informs a lot of things. But that's a subject for another podcast. But once you have those one or two elements, then you can start usually modeling, and then, well, you have a bunch of tools you can use. In general, I would say it doesn't really matter what tool you use, whether it's Maya, Max, Modo, whatnot, as your general package.
As long as it's not Blender, then Blender.
Flender. Sorry, Flender. I think you meant Flender.
As long as it's not Blender, then you're good.
I mean, personally, like, you use Blender, I don't care. As long as, you can do what you need to do with it. And then you have a sculpting package which most often will be either ZBrush or Mudbox. ZBrush is way more present in the industry, but I know there are some people who prefer to use Mudbox out there. Really
Somewhere.
Legendary people.
There's a guy.
No offense, Mudbox users.
Little.
Don't be angry.
Mudbox users, that's funny.
So yeah, you end up making this high poly sculpt, then you retopologize it, and then again, there's a bunch of different retopology tools. I know you guys touched on it in another video. It really does not matter which one you use.
No.
Topology is topology.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same thing for the sculpt, really. It's like, what matters is the end output, right? As long as you can do it with a tool that's not too obscure so that someone else can take your file and actually use it.
Don't use Wings 3D.
Because again, I know we already touched on this, but it's super important. You're working in a collaborative space.
Yeah.
Someone at some point will need to open your file, and it needs, to be understandable.
Yeah.
But so yeah, you make that first sculpt, then you retopologize it. Of course, you make UVs for it. And this is where I think the process starts changing radically from VFX to games. Is that in games, well, your retopo is a lot more low res, right? Because it has to run at 60 or 30 frames per second real time on a console or on a PC or on a mobile phone sometimes, right? Because the mobile game industry is really
huge.
Big, and people don't talk about it enough, but there are lots of jobs there, especially for juniors.
Yeah.
But you do that retopo, and then what you do is a process called baking. So you do retopo, then UVs, then baking. And what baking is essentially you are projecting the information that is on your high poly sculpt on your low poly mesh. And what that allows you to do is you get a bunch of maps, which have a bunch of funky names like AO map, normal map, curvature map, etc. map. And you're going to use those maps later on to make your really low res model look like the high res one. It's like if you look at really old paintings and you have those fake effects to have depth and details on walls that are actually flat. Well, this is essentially what you're doing with like stuff like normal maps. We're doing the Renaissance, but in games. And some of those maps are actually used in the next process, which is called texturing. And this is where you make all your nice colors and materials and everything. Usually you kind of texture and you do your diffuse texture and you define your materials at the same time. And then this is exported, and either you have to make shaders, and in that case, they're usually simple shaders if it's a smaller company or like a smaller scale project, or if you're something a little bigger, usually there's a person called a tech artist who creates shaders for you, and you just hand the whole package to that person.
But up until this point, it would still just be you.
Yeah, it's just you. But as much as it's just you, it sounds like it's a very waterfall process where it's like straight line, but actually there might be a lot of iterations.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon that you start modeling a character and that someone points out that there is a problem with the concept art. And like, oh, you know what? This big tube here next to the character's head, it's going to make the character not be able to turn his head. And that's a problem. We need to have this character turn his head all the time because of gameplay reasons. And suddenly you have to have the concept art intervene again, the concept artist intervene again, fix the concept art with you, sometimes directly on the sculpt. He's not going to make a new drawing. He's just going to sit next to you and you're going to do it together. And so this is just one example. Personally, I really prefer working like that. So I don't really like when I receive the finished concept art. I'd rather be sitting next to the concept artist and we work the concept together. And actually the concept is finished almost just before the final sculpt is finished. And I think it's a really cool process because you get to be two brains rather than one. And usually you get better results when you do that. Because if he's just doing the concept art in a vacuum and I'm just doing the model in a vacuum, there will be things that no one caught at some point and that will cause problems down the line. And when those things arise, well, we have to go back to the drawing board and we're losing weeks of work, which is ridiculous. So like imagine you've done your high poly sculpt, you actually finish the character, you have your low poly, your bakes, your textures, and somebody points out that there's a big problem on the high poly sculpt that comes from the design. Well, you have to go back to that, and then you have to maybe fix your UVs, and then maybe rebake, and definitely fix some textures. It's a massive truckload of problems that you'd rather avoid by just talking with people early enough in the process. But it's actually something I really enjoy because you don't just sit in a dark room with your headphones and you get to make games with people, which is kind of cool. So,
but I've seen that on
process.
I've seen that on projects as well, where if I'm doing a sculpt or a creature or something, I've made it a point, or like I made an effort to always talk to a texture artist while I'm doing it, because oftentimes they'll have input on how they want the UVs laid out. Instead of making everything yourself and assuming everything will be fine, you hand it off to a texture artist, and then all of a sudden you're on a different task. And then 2 months later, they come back like, oh, now we need UV changes, which means that, okay, well, we're going to have to update a bunch of stuff. But like you said, if you just communicate properly, like obviously, if you are the one that takes it through the pipeline, like most of the way, if you're in a game studio, then you have more control. But if you know the person who's going to be texturing or working with, even in rigging, then you could always address those issues super early on.
Yeah, I mean, I think whether you work in games or VFX, it's paramount that you remember that you're part of a team that has a common goal, and that the goal is not you finishing the asset. The goal is not the portfolio. The goal is that you get to make that shot together and that it looks amazing and that it serves the movie well. The goal is that this character deforms well and can be great for players, because the end goal is always like the spectators that go to the movies, or the players that get the controller and then have their hand and enjoy your game. If they get an awesome experience, good job, team. If something is not working correctly, well, it's not necessarily one guy who messed up. It's a team communication failure most often. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure that whenever you did that, talking to a rigger or a texture artist, you actually saved your company thousands of pounds.
Definitely. You're talking about something here which I think is kind of interesting as well. This is something people confuse all the time: concept artist versus the production artist. Here, this is what Morten and I were doing as well in film. Production art. There might be some times where you are doing concept art, where you're doing concept scopes, and they have like a rough idea, and maybe they don't have budgets for art department, and they're just like, let's just do it right away. We worked on some of that, but in general, they're two very separate things. One is generally coming up with ideas. The other one is coming up with the thing which actually works. It's kind of like one draws a car, the other one makes the car work as a mechanic. So they're usually very different things. And I see this all the time where you have people who they want to become concept artists, but they just have like 3D models with topology in their portfolio and UVs and all that, which is helpful, but you should definitely have a portfolio which, instead of just having tight UVs and all that, you should just show that you can do ideas. A concept artist is just an ideas artist, really. Yeah, I mean, very often I think concept artists also confuse themselves as illustrators, whereas the most important thing is not how clean if you're doing concept, right? It's not how clean your topology is, or you know, how impressive this or that is that you have amazing visual ideas that answer a brief, right? I think that being able to like put your own style aside and then be able to answer, like you say, the brief. Like you can like put your ego aside on what you want to make as a concept artist, but actually answer the brief. I think that's super important. Yeah, exactly. And then you have the production side of the thing where you execute. But I feel that this really black and white difference kind of thing is very true at junior level, but very often the more you go up the ranks,
the more senior people in production also have some good design knowledge. And they can sometimes impact on the concept. Like sometimes they will take a concept and they will actually make it better. Sometimes they will raise some issues. Sometimes they will fix some issues. Sometimes they'll actually be asked to do both concept and production level.
Absolutely.
And so if you're listening to this and you're junior, I think it's really important that you choose if you want to do more concept or more production, and understand what are the difference between both of these and what you need to do to, get your first job in there or your first internship. But also be aware that as you progress, you'll definitely be able to acquire a more varied skill set that will allow you to, just take on other tasks than just the first thing you got hired for. And I think this is one of the exciting things in these careers, right? Is you don't just start doing one thing and do that for the next 20 years or more. It's like you get to master one thing and then learn another and just expand your horizons. And it's really cool because it allows your day job to be more and more varied, and so you just don't get bored because you get to do more and more things and acquire more and more mastery of those things. But also you get to go home with that skill set and do more and more to really expand the scope of your personal art. And that's also really cool.
That's why I love working in this field here. Like when I was working construction before, like 10 years ago, and it was a job. You got home and the only thing you got was a paycheck. That was it. There was no deeper satisfaction. Some people did. I didn't. But in this job here, there was so much overlap between your job, between your job and what you really have a deep passion for. So the technology is evolving super fast. There's so many new cool tools to play with here. So many new tutorials everywhere, and there's just so much passion in this field. I really enjoyed working in. Well, I still do work in this field, just work in a different part of the field.
Yeah.
Now we bring you podcast from Vincent instead of actually doing movies.
They got lazy. I'll just say that.
Super lazy.
It's all downhill from here.
First you get good, then you make podcasts. The next thing you know.
It's very lucrative business, making free podcasts.
Oh, those YouTube ads. Click on our ads.
They really pay the bills, huh?
Exactly. One I think I want to talk about is soft skills. We've been talking about this sometimes with the hard skills versus soft skills, and I just want to first define what I mean by that because there's been some confusion here.
It's hard surface and organic sculpture.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So what I mean by hard skills is stuff like that is your actual skills. That is measurable skills. How good are you at topology? How many kilos can you lift? All these kind of things. Measurable skills. Soft skills, they're less tangible. They're like, how good are you as a communicator? Do you write nice emails? Generally, how easy are you to work with a team? And I find that a bunch of people, they assume this job is 100% hard skills, like what you were talking about before. You put on your headphones and then you just develop games. You just sculpt hardcore characters all day long and all that. And this is, now I haven't worked in games, but this is the same in all fields. It's like, maybe it's like 60% hard skills, 40% soft skills, or switched around. The point is, the soft skill portion is super important. So I'd just like to hear your thoughts on this, Vincent, about like your communication skills versus your actual hardcore, super sexy sculpting skills.
Well, it might put off a few people, but I'll just start with this. I'd rather have someone whose hard skills are a bit lower, but that communicates very well than the opposite. Because I've definitely been in the case where I got to work with someone who was just extremely good at what he does, but that person was a pain to work with.
Yeah.
It created frustration, it damaged the morale in the team, and it impacted a lot more than just his tasks. It impacted everyone else. Whereas someone who's maybe not on that level yet, first of all, that person can grow.
Yeah.
Just assume that everybody wants to grow, because it's true for most people, really. But on top of that, that person will impact the morale positively, right? as much as it's true that there's a downward spiral, there's also a virtuous circle. And the idea is that someone who is nice to people, says hi to people when he gets into the office, someone who, when he passes a file to you, he makes sure that everything is perfectly renamed and organized so that it's easy for you to work with, and even writes you an email and sends you the link to where that specific file is located on the server so you don't have to spend 5 minutes searching for it. Mm-hmm. That guy makes the whole day better, because everyone has just an easier time doing their job, and everyone is much more inclined staying after work for a beer than if you just had a painful day of fixing somebody's mess.
Just want to go home.
Which does happen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely happened to me that, you know, some artists sometimes on Gumroad, like, they just sell their sculpt and you can study it.
Yeah.
Like some like super high-end artist. And it's happened to me that, like, I was a big fan of a specific guy and I thought, you know what, I really want to know how he works. And I opened the file and I was like, oh, horrors, the Pandora's box, you know? And I was like, wow, this is so messy. And maybe that's just his personal work and he's actually complete control freak with organization at work. But generally that's not the case.
No,
and I thought, wow, if I had to work with that person, and unfortunately I've had to work with people like this, it just makes everything harder.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to spend an hour turning off layers in your Photoshop file trying to understand where is the whatever thingy that you're looking to fix.
Yeah.
Right? People would much rather have a bit more work to do, but actually knowing what to do and just getting to work than just wasting their time with meaningless stuff. And so that's one thing. But yeah, again, communication in general, like, people who are efficient at saying what they need, what is blocking them, right? Or people who will not sometimes be scared of raising issues before they happen, but also not doing like complete assholes. Mm-hmm. Because there's some of that too. There's people who are really good, and guess what? They know they're really good. And so they grow quite entitled. And so they behave in a way that's just inappropriate towards other people who are just, you know, maybe they're a bit more junior or they're on their way, but that's not a reason. Actually, the best senior is also the guy who's a mentor.
Yeah.
And, we need more of these people, because like I think people don't realize how much communication is like paramount in these fields. If you want to be the best artist in the world and kick ass and pretend, like, be really pretentious, great, do it at home. Do the best portfolio work you can. Sell it to people if you want on Gumroad. But if you want to make games or movies, and you're gonna need a team to do that, and everybody's morale is important. So yeah, that's my long rant on communication.
Yeah, it's like I've seen bad artists or mediocre artists become really good artists. I've never seen a shitty person become a good person. That is like that's like what all the redemption stories in Hollywood are about. But like that's
it takes a lot.
It really takes a lot.
Especially if you're already at a level where you've reached a level where you can perform, like you can deliver your task and you can deliver them really well. Then most of the time people are like, okay, yeah, we just really need that. So that can be a bit tricky.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, just being nice and a good person to work with, it doesn't take that much effort, and also you get a lot back from it, right? Yeah. You just see people being happy when you're being a good communicator and a good professional. But it's not that hard before you wrap up something to just call the guy who's the next in the pipeline and ask him to sit behind your computer for 5 minutes and ask him if that's okay, if he likes it, or if he wants, he thinks some changes would be good before this is sent for review. This will be highly appreciated. Like, seriously, I've had guys tell me, oh my God, no one ever asked me my opinion before. And I always had to fix people's stuff. But because I'm a bit of an introvert, I never dared to speak up. Yeah. You're the first one to ask. And I was like, what? This is such a basic thing, right? Yeah. And then the next time, that guy, he just made it easier for everybody else. Yeah. Because, I mean, that kind of good behavior, it's also contagious. Because when someone benefits from it, well, usually they're not blind. They see how much better everybody's life gets. And so they try to propagate that kind of behavior. And it just makes for a happier team overall. But also, let's say, just take that little PSD example. Let's say every week you lose an hour or two because of something like that. Let's say everybody does that. That means at the end of a 3-year project, let's take a typical AAA game production cycle. You lost months.
Yeah. To PSD files.
Yeah, you lost months, right?
Yeah.
And your hair and happiness.
Yeah, you lost months, and also you're more frustrated, you're more stressed.
Yeah.
It's just nobody wins. The game costs more to make for the studio. Maybe that's a milestone that your team didn't hit, and so your bonus now is reduced, right? Maybe you hit you missed the perfect release window for your game, and so your game is going to make less sales. I mean, this thing can cascade like crazy. Or maybe your game has to release at that specific time, and so it's going to release as a lesser product. And maybe those 3 years of work, well, they're just not going to cut it. Because if you look at AAA games and the ones that are very successful, it's actually a minority. And it's the ones that excel at everything. Like, there is not that much room for mediocre games. Like, just look at a genre like first-person shooters. How many first-person shooter franchises are there that are successful? Like, I can think of 3 or 4, top of my head. And maybe in those 3 or 4, there's like 1 or 2 that are already making way more money than number 3 and 4. And there's probably, 100 that are made every year. So you'd like to be number 1, right?
You just see Call of Duty. That's it.
Well, that's not what I'm saying.
No, but I mean, that's once you get to the point where you're so big, if you take something like Call of Duty, right? I don't know. I would assume that Call of Duty is probably the biggest FPS franchise.
I think it's fair to say. I may be wrong, but
I guess it's like COD or in Battlefield.
Yeah, it's COD and Battlefield.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And like, they're the big players, and like they've been consistent for a long time with that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So,
and if you look, like, you take a game like Titanfall, which is really well made and is a really good game, well, they're struggling behind. And you're like, what? A product like Titanfall, which is so well crafted and actually made by the original guys who were making Call of Duty, this thing is struggling, even though it's fantastic. Well, that's the reality of the industry you're in. So as a little, cog in the machine, I think it's also your job to make it easier for everybody else to do theirs. So maybe, you can just make the game 2% better, because that might be what allows you to stand out and just kick ass. I mean, it's a big win, right? You release a successful product, and I think it's the same thing for a movie. Your friends are excited by it. You're super proud of it. Maybe, your studio gets the next project, so you don't get laid off. That's also kind of cool. if you hit really big numbers, maybe you get a nice bonus. If you ship on time, maybe then you get extra vacation, because the next production cycle is going to start in a few months. So everybody wins. So it all comes down to the small things of every day, right? It's not just about the best character sculpt.
No,
definitely not.
No, and it's not that one PSD file named correctly once is going to make or break it, but it's consistent behavior, right? It's if everyone is really consistent and really solid in everything they're doing, this kind of stuff spirals up in a good way. Like, this accumulates. If everyone makes everything 1% better, I mean, this really has good impact on the team. There are so many times I've seen that somebody makes one mistake in a model just because they're sloppy, and particularly if that's a character model. If your model has some shaded topology which has to be fixed, then maybe you go back to concept sculpting, topology, UVs, textures, rigging. Maybe it's in shots. There have been cases here where a fix in concept sculpting would have taken me literally half an hour to fix. Legit half an hour, and that ended up costing us around 20 to 30 days. Full days.
It's a compound effect.
It really does. Like, it's crazy like that.
Yeah.
That's 30 full days extra for the production for between 6-7 people.
Yeah.
And it could have been fixed in half an hour if people had communicated
it's
properly.
It's like when you're told to interpret a brush stroke.
Yeah.
They're like, just make it look like the brush stroke.
Yeah.
It's like, what does that mean?
Talking about?
Yeah, I mean, that what does that mean thing, it's important just to feed back into that communication point, is that you have to be precise.
Yeah.
It's really important, because sometimes being precise, cost you to pause for a second and to really think about what you're going to communicate, but it can go a long way, because one thing you have to be super aware of is that whatever industry you're working in, right, as long as you're working with other people, they are humans. And what's really important about humans is they don't all understand things the same way. They don't all see things the same way. It's like we all have a pair of glasses, but we don't see the same thing through them. Mm-hmm. And so you really have to make sure that you're super precise with the information you're passing through. And also, if you can, make sure the person understands if you're explaining something a bit complex. Because like we said, we have different jobs. Like today I'm a character artist and I have to talk to a rigger. And I want specific things in the characters, but he wants other things. But I have to try to understand what he wants to make it good for him. And it'd be good if he understands my constraints, which may lead him to work a little more, but in the end, it will make a better thing. But because we have different jobs, sometimes we don't understand each other. And it really, really is valuable that sometimes just people sit down and share a bit of their knowledge and are not just, I'm doing job A, you're doing job B. As soon as I reach the border of job A, it's not my concern anymore. Screw you. Now it's your fault if things fall apart. No, it's everybody's fault. Right? And so it's really good to cultivate that kind of blurriness where you know a little bit of everybody's job so that you know enough so that when they speak, you can understand and vice versa. And in the end, it's also more fun, right? Because like you said, you got into movies because you like movies, not just because creatures, right? So I think sometimes it's great if you can think about the end product when you're doing your job, because let's be honest, in every job, there are some really annoying things. Like if you ask an artist in games, I don't think there's so many that enjoy doing UVs and baking. It's long. I mean, UVs are simple nowadays. Let's say retopo and baking. It's tedious. And it's not fun. Usually you see people putting their headphones on and listening to podcasts while they do that stuff.
That's my life when I'm doing that.
Right? So when you do that stuff, it's still super important, right? Because whatever comes after in the process, whether it's your next stage, which is texturing, or somebody else's next stage, they're dependent on those nice little UVs and bakes and everything. So I think it's super important that you keep in mind the end goal, because many times it just gives you the strength to push that extra mile, to make sure that you just make everything of the same quality. And it works in fractals. So right now I just talked about different tasks, but it works inside modeling too. How many artists love to model faces, but just hate doing ears? And you see models with like incredible nose and mouth and ear, and the ears are disastrous. And you can really tell, whoa, this guy is not consistent in his work, right? I mean, I don't know how many movies have close-up of ears, but still.
Probably not that many,
No.
Depth of field takes care of that.
Don't listen to him. Just model your ears right.
I remember an example of where I was working on a film with like a certain tree-like character. It's called that. And we had this issue where we're doing a bunch of branches.
I am tree.
Maybe it was that one.
I don't know.
Maybe not.
And we had this issue where we needed to do something to all the branches at the same time. And this was, because we were in the stages of modeling, it was agreed upon that this should be taken care of in modeling. But looking at it, we were discussing it, we figured out this is actually way easier to do in rigging. Like, this is not a rigging task, but doing this in rigging would future-proof us. And we could do iterations of it, and it would just all still be there in rigging. But I don't know, because of lack of communication and unwillingness to try to like communicate like between departments, this ended up being done in modeling. And that just wasted weeks of, work. It's like, instead of like doing that extra effort, we go like, you know what, let's do this in rigging, even though it's not technically our task, but it can speed up the entire process. That helps the entire project instead of just helping your department shave off a few hours or a few days worth of work.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. And as like a small pro tip, when you're interviewing in a company that's whatever the size, see if you're ever interviewed at some point during the day by someone that's not doing your job, because that's a really good sign. If you're an artist and at some point you're interviewed by a programmer, that's a great sign that there's communication in the company. Because what the company is doing here is they're having someone that has a different job than you see if you're a nice guy, because that guy cannot tell if you're a good artist. He cannot tell if your topology is good or right. That he doesn't care, actually. That's not his job, right? But he cares if you're going to be a team fit. Yeah. So this is always a really good sign.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole other podcast about interviews and career management and whatever, but I think it fits quite well.
No, absolutely.
Communication thing.
I think one of the key things I've seen, which is a problem with people, is if they assume that their job is to provide the best damn thing they can in ZBrush, or the best damn model they can from there. But in reality, it's not about the best Maya model or best ZBrush model. It's about what's the best final result, like you're talking about here, Morten. That in this case, this should have been done in rigging, but it was done in modeling. So I always try to think about that my best end result wasn't what's best just from my output. It's how will this help the entire production.
Yeah.
There were a lot of times here where you just have to do something in rigging, or like it's way easier to do this in texturing than it is to do it in modeling. Like particularly if you're doing like small details, we talk about this. Do them in Mari, don't necessarily do them in ZBrush. But maybe you have somebody now who's like, I just want to do them in ZBrush. Yeah, but it doesn't matter because it's not about
what's it's not about your feelings.
No, exactly. It's not about your feelings. What you think here is irrelevant. It's what's the best for the project. How can you make sure this is as smooth as possible for everyone? So it's not that you have to always do it in Mari or Paint or whatever it is you're using. It's just figure out what's the best possible output. In film, that is, how can this look the best it possibly can on the screen, and not necessarily what's the best output I can provide from ZBrush. Sometimes you got to be, I would love to do this in ZBrush, I'd love to do this in Maya, whatever, but this should be done by a different person just because it's going to be so much easier for everyone.
It's where you put your ego aside and you're like, okay, this is better for the project.
Yeah, exactly. I'm delivering something which is less sexy, but it's going to be way better down the pipe for that.
That's what you talked about, and like just leave your ego at home to do all the stuff there, but try to focus on what's good for everyone.
And I think like when you're saying leave your ego at home, it's not an insult or whatever. It's actually a good tip, because if you have some of your ego at home, meaning if you're doing personal work, that's what it means. It doesn't mean like shut up and do what you're told.
No.
It means please do personal work, because when you do that, you're in control.
Yeah.
You're the director. And then when you go to your day job, you already feel that you have that desire fulfilled. You know, you don't need to fulfill that at work, right? It's really important, because it's very likely that for many jobs in your career, you're not going to do 100% what you like, whether it's in terms of style or in terms of a technique that you're using. You're rarely going to do 100% what you like. It's very likely that when you start your first job, maybe you're going to do 20% what you like. And the more you grow, the more you have access to job opportunities, and you get closer, you know, to whatever it is that is your dream job, like we call, right? But I would say even right now, like maybe I'm doing, 75 or 80% what I like, which I consider to be an extremely lucky position. There's still those 20% that are missing, right? And I'm not trying to force them on my colleagues. Like, don't do that. Do it at home, because then that desire is fulfilled. You don't come to work with some kind of weird frustration that you didn't do your anatomy sculpt this morning or whatever. And also it's cool because you get to do this 100% thing. You get to do it at home when you're supposedly relaxed. You don't have time pressure.
Yeah.
You don't have it, right? There is no deadline. You can use whatever tools you want. It's just great. There's also no one to judge you. You don't have to show it in a daily review or whatever.
No deadline.
Yeah, and I think like when you do that, it's a lot easier to go to work and just be a bit more chill about what you're doing. Absolutely. And I had to learn that the hard way, because I remember at my first job when I was a junior, I was very aware that I wanted to leave that company and go to a better place. Mm. I was very aware that that company was not Blizzard, right? Painfully aware that I was not doing really cool heroic fantasy warrior characters, blah, 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 but that I was doing some architecture, furniture for an iPad app. Yeah. And that it killed me in my soul, you know? And so I guess that frustration, it really bled through at work. because I was spending a lot of energy complaining and just maybe not being the best colleague. And then when I would go home, guess what? I was drained because I was thinking the whole day about how miserable my work was rather than just spending my energy in a more efficient way. And I remember I had a friend that I was ranting to about this stuff, and she told me, are you done? Like, can you actually like fix this instead of complaining? And I was like, yeah, but they should give me better time. Like, no, it's up to you. This is a situation, deal with it. It's like, no one should like fix it for you. If you're at this job, it's because you're not good enough to be at another job. Now, change that yourself and stop whining. And I'm like, okay. And so, I started whining a bit less at work. And suddenly, I guess I realized that I had more energy in the morning or in the evening when I got home. And I would just spend that extra 1 hour on something cool that would get me closer to my dream. And I think I just kept doing that because I realized that it allowed me to be a lot more chill at work and also easily take in those times where, you're just doing something that you're so fully against, but it's fine. It's your job. You do it. You're a professional, and then you go home and you do whatever you want.
Yeah. So I think that's important to know that every job is going to have areas which sucks. Like that is just the way it is. But if you work for a game company and you get to make video games for a living and you're complaining about that you have to do bakes or retopology, you are being a bitch and you need to shut the hell up right now.
First world problems.
That's what
we call them.
It's like the top of problems here. Like you have no right to complain about anything.
No, I mean, wherever you are in the pyramid, it's always good to remember that, hey, you know what? You're getting paid to do 3D.
Yeah.
And maybe at the current stage you're at, you're not being paid much and you're not doing the kind of 3D you want, but you are on that map, you are on that path, and it's up to you to, just find a way to keep pushing and grow towards wherever, your dreams are whether it's Blizzard or whatnot.
There's something we talked about before. I don't know why we keep talking about Gods of Egypt. It just naturally
you
leads.
keep bringing it up, Morten. You keep bringing it up.
But that was something exactly that happened to me. Like I did like bricks or some shit for like 3 months. Bricks and rocks, right?
You were dead inside.
I was dead inside. I mean, I still learned a lot from it. I guess. I think.
You know how to make really good rocks now.
Let's pretend I learned something from it. I can't remember anymore. But it's still a lot. It was like that was still a stepping stone to something else. Like you don't come to work and like complain about, fuck, I have to do rocks again. I have to do rocks again. It's like you try to make the most of what you have there. You make it better, and then you try to see how can you better that in the future. Like, okay, how can I take what I've learned here about making rocks and possibly making, I don't know, maybe a rock creature or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a learning opportunity in something, even if it's something you feel like you completely master or something that you feel is not relevant to your job.
Yeah.
And like skills bleed from one, category
it's all
to
connected,
another. Right, exactly. And it's really important to get some awareness of this because some people think that they're going to get good at, I don't know, realistic characters just by doing realistic characters. But I've seen some guys like switching from stylized to realistic, and they brought appeal basically, which is something that when you do realistic stuff, I rarely hear it discussed. Yeah. People talk about anatomy, they talk about the tech to get, those skin pores in and whatnot. But I see a lot of very, very realistic characters that are just completely bland and are unappealing, and they just, no one cares for them past the technical standpoint. And it's the same thing vice versa. Say you're doing realistic stuff and you're going into stylized, you're going to bring that anatomy knowledge that allows you to understand how to group those shapes and find new ways to stylize them and make them appealing. That's also super interesting. So whatever it is you're doing right now that maybe you don't really like, try to find if there's something you can learn directly in your task or around that task that you can feed back in whatever it is you really like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The last thing I want to talk about here now, because we've been talking about it for a good hour now, having fun, is I think it's important that if you're a student, most of the people who listen to this, I assume, will be students, is that you don't have to have Blizzard, Naughty Dog, or any of these studio here as a goal as your first job. You can have them as long-term goals, and that's awesome. But these are hard studios to get into. I would recommend that you set more for smaller studios, and something which are stepping stones, which is essentially the gods of Egypt to you, which is you're doing something which it's a fine job. It's still a feature film job. It's still a relevant experience. But
so you're paid.
Yeah, exactly.
You
can keep on living.
The first step here is to get a job, and then you just need to get into the industry. Once you're in the industry, everything is so much easier. At least in film, the first job getting is the hardest one.
Yeah, that one sucks.
Yeah, it's just a bit tricky to get. But if you can't get into Blizzard right away, don't fear. Like,
it doesn't mean you can never get to Blizzard.
No, exactly.
Exactly, and also like two things. Only a certain percentage of junior or students are going to get a first job.
Yeah.
And of that percentage, less than 1% will get in a company like Blizzard or Naughty Dog. So that's a reality. Like, get over it. Seriously.
Yeah. That's not arguable. Those are facts.
But that's the first thing. Also, the second thing is, let's say you're really, really good and you do manage to get there. It's very likely you will be crushed by the complexity of things. These companies are working at a level that is insanely high.
Yeah.
The demands they have are insanely high. They are delivering the best products for the widest and most demanding audiences there are.
Like in the world, ever.
I mean, for now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're working on Overwatch. There's 40 million players playing your game. It's just ridiculous numbers, right? I'm not saying there's no place for a junior character artist there. That's Blizzard's role to answer, right? But it's very unlikely that, you get there, and like the pressure is just so big, right? So I think you might enjoy getting in a bigger company like this a lot more once you have some experience. Yeah. Because you will have learned also not only to make good art like we talked about, but like how to be a good professional. Yeah. Because it'd be really sad if you get in a really big company and turns out you're a bit immature, even though you make great art, and the door finds you really fast because of that. And again, we're always talking about communication, but I've seen that happens. Guys who were really, really good, but just couldn't get along with the team. Boom, the door. Yeah. Really fast. That's what trial periods are for. So definitely it's fine if you don't get in one of those big companies right now. And like open your horizons a bit, because seriously, I remember when I started out, I just wanted to get in Ubisoft Montreal. Like that was the dream, and everything else was crap. It was like very black and white, and it was very immature of me to think that way. But I know a lot of students do, also because this is the dream. This is what you see, right? You go into a video game store, the first box cover art that you see, or the first big, cardboard stand-up that has like a cool cover art from a game. It's not a small indie game. No. Right? It's Call of Duty, it's the new Uncharted, it's all those things. Yet, those games exist. The companies that make them exist. And there's a lot to learn there. And there's also great experiences to have. I mean, I got to work in a small studio that was just 12 people, and we were doing collectibles. And it turns out that, I learned a lot because it was not a big AAA machine. So I had to expand a little bit my responsibilities. I could not just be the guy doing his small character on the side. Sometimes I had to answer an email from a client, and I had to be really, really careful when I answered that email because they were steaks, right? Yeah. So not steaks that you eat, but steaks that make the whole company collapse. The worst kind of steak. The worst kind of steaks, actually. And so that allowed me to just improve my communication skills, because maybe one day I made a mistake, and someday someone saw it, and the CEO was like, "Why did you write that email?" Right? And but also I got access to just talking to people who had more varied skill set, because again, those companies tend to be smaller, so smaller teams mean more diverse skill set in the team. So you get to learn more about what the game designer is doing and what the rigger is doing, etc., etc. Whereas if you're in a super big team that that has like say 200 developers, and well, all the people you're going to talk to are just going to be artists, and you're not going to know so much about the other jobs, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to know how to do the best thing ever for the rigor, for the narrative, blah, blah, blah. Because very often, like, if you can buy the best Gumroads out there, they don't teach you that much. There's definitely some things about best practices, but I'm pretty sure that Gumroads on character art are made by character artists and not riggers. So they're giving you a character artist perspective, at least most of the time. And you definitely want to avoid being that guy, right? So it's definitely so valuable to join smaller companies which are doing more humble projects. Yeah. You will get to learn your craft with less pressure and meeting more diverse people, at least in terms of skill set. And that's super valuable. And less pressure means that you have more energy than when you go home, usually. Those companies also are less subject to crunch, I believe, because when you're working on AAA games, again, the stakes that you eat are so high that it's quite common that there is such a thing called crunch, meaning that people work more hours, even though as an industry we're trying to reduce that thing, but it still exists. Well, you're going to have less of that usually in smaller companies that have less ambitious projects, because there are not 20 million gamers waiting for your game to release. Like, most likely there's a few, but a lot of people don't care. Mm-hmm. Meaning less stakes, meaning you can take a bit more time, have less pressure on you, go home, do kick-ass art, and then if the company grows, you might want to stay in that company and grow with it, because sometimes it's really cool,
Yeah.
Or sometimes you might outgrow the company and decide to go to the next one. And again, it might not be Blizzard, but it might be one step closer. And the simple fact that you see yourself growing from one small company to another, etc., is a lot more exciting and empowering, but than just staying at the doorstep of Blizzard, saying applications that no one cares about.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is all really good. We are reaching a long time now for our podcast, but do you have anything final thing you want to say? Any wisdom, anything you want to share with people? Anything you want to end the interview with?
Oh, wow. Well, I dropped, I think, a lot of pretentious bullshit for 1 hour.
Not a good knowledge.
so I guess I'll stop at that. But since we're at CCP, I'll just say that currently we're making an MMO. That's the only thing that's public about the game we're doing. And we're actively looking for a very talented VFX artist. What I mean by VFX artist is not someone that comes from the VFX industry. It's someone that makes explosions and stuff.
An effects artist.
Exactly, an effects artist. But for some reason we call it a VFX artist.
Yeah, I have no idea why.
A visual effects artist?
Yeah, exactly, but for games, right? That's super important, because we've had applications from people who are VFX artists for movies, but the skills just don't translate at all. So if you're a really good VFX artist and you want to do some cool stuff, feel free to reach out. I believe you guys will have my contact details.
Maybe
in the notes or whatever,
sure, yeah.
Or you can just go on CCP's website.
Go to CCP's website.
We'll probably have links to it.
We can confirm it is a very nice office,
it's
and they have free soda. I might have stolen a cherry coke before.
It's pretty fucking nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll give you the bill on the way out.
For those 2 cokes.
£1.
Another small thing is, I know you guys have opened a really cool store, and we've been talking about me getting something in the store for a while now, which was quite difficult because I've just moved to London, so I just got internet 2 days ago, like literally. But yeah, recently I built a bust base mesh to just do character faces, and the reason I did that is that A, we needed a new one at CCP for production, and B, we looked for a lot of base meshes on different asset stores, and we found out that there was just nothing that fit our needs. There was always a problem with topology or UVs or whatnot. And so we decided to make ours. And we're just trying to spread the gospel of good topology by putting it on the FlippedNormals marketplace, where it will say exclusively there for a while. Hopefully, if this is something that's interesting for you, well, it's not going to be too expensive. So I think it's money well spent, because a good base mesh is always super useful. And I guess I was just using bad ones for a really long time, and
Yeah.
I always ended up regretting not spending the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one is a really cool one, and the cool thing is you can also modify it to your own needs if you feel that there's things that get in your way or whatever. But hopefully it was built for it not to be the case.
Yeah.
And I just want to give a shout out to Tom Parker, who is a really good character artist and who took a look at that base mesh and helped me out ironing out the last small annoying things that I couldn't
Tom
figure out.
Parker's stamp of approval.
I don't know about that.
You just said it. It definitely has.
Yeah, that's a fact.
But I definitely want to say, like, he's a really good artist. Go check his stuff out. And I know he's going to release a tutorial on topology soon. So you should definitely look out for this stuff because he knows his stuff on the subject. So
Cool.
there you go. That's about it for me.
All right.
Cool. Thank you very much. It's been a super nice chat with here at CCP Games with Vincent. I really enjoyed this chat.
Very long, but very informative, I think.
Yeah.
So, thank you for listening, everyone. Thank you, Vincent.
That was a pleasure. See you next time, guys.
Yeah.